Testing. Hey, where's the rest of our crew? Wednesday night crew. Everybody doing okay? Huh? Watching the debates. Well, I have to be honest with you. I had to quit watching the news. So what debates? Okay. I'm serious. I had to quit watching. I just had to quit watching. Okay. Okay. So it's the debates between the people that are not indicted. Right? Okay. I got you. Will they have a debate for those who are indicted later? Yeah, I had to quit watching. My nerves couldn't take it. I just get mad and start thinking lost folks' thoughts, you know. Do what? I'm telling you, it's, I had to quit watching. All right, well, let's go to Joshua 13. We're going to try to cover 13 and 14 tonight. I can't guarantee it. I don't know how long my voice is going to last. I'm getting a sinus infection and been coughing all day. So y'all bear with me, please, especially if I start coughing. But Joshua 13 and 14, and let me lead us in prayer. Father, we just thank you for letting us come tonight to open and study your word, and I pray that you just guide us through it, even through these what we think is difficult sections, because they're hard to read. A bunch of places that we've never heard of. We don't know where they are. They're hard to say. But Father, we know that you have recorded your word and given it to us for a purpose. And so help us to find that purpose so we can apply it in our own lives. And it's in Christ's name I pray. Amen. So chapter 13, just is kind of an introduction here. Chapter 13 is really a transition point for the book of Joshua. I shared with you last week when we finished 12, I said we're at a major division. And I told you, or reminded you, because I've already told you a couple of times, that the book of Joshua is divided into three sections. Joshua chapters 1 through 5 is entering the land. Chapters 6 through 12 is conquering the land. And then 13 through 24 is the distribution of the land. And so this is that, we're beginning the last section of the book of Joshua. So this is that transition from conquering the land to distributing the land. And so Israel is we're moving from reading about conquest to reading about distribution. We're moving from reading about wars to reading about land surveys. Sounds exciting, right? But that's what the next few chapters are about. And so Joshua's role is changing as well. Joshua's been the commander, leading them in all these wars, and now, after he's successfully completed that part of his job, his divine commission, now he has to fulfill the second part of his divine commission, and that's to divide the land between the tribes of Israel. And so that's what we're going to begin seeing here. But here's the thought I just want to put into your mind. I want you to think about this. The nation of Israel, up until chapter 13, which we have not read yet, they've never, as a nation, and we're talking about 3 or 4 million people, they've never owned an acre of land. Think about it. They've always been, for centuries, since Abraham, remember it all began with Abraham, God called Abraham, they've always been pilgrims. They've always been sojourners. They've always lived in tents, moving from place to place, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, until Joseph's time, and they go to Egypt, and they're there for 400 years living in slavery, and then after the slavery, they leave during the Exodus, and then they spend the next 40-something years wandering around the desert, but for centuries, they've never owned an acre of land. So they're a nation of several million people, but they don't have land. Okay, they have a land promise, but they've never owned an acre. Now they're about to own an acre. Well, several acres, right? So this is about the promise of land that God has been promising since the time of Abraham is about to be given to them in this chapter. So you know that it has to be exciting for them as they get ready to actually possess the land that has been promised. So chapter 13, verse 1. This is kind of comical. It says, "Now Joshua was old and advanced in years, and the Lord said to him, 'You are old and advanced in years.'" I mean, you know you're old when the Lord tells you you're old, right? And advanced in years. Now, Carol asked a good question last week about the age of Joshua. And we were just kind of guessing at his age. But in Joshua 24, verse 29, he's 110 when he dies. We don't know how old he is here, but he's old. And the guesses that I've read, just in the books that I've read, the people who are a lot smarter than me guess between 85 and 100 years old at this point. And most of them are saying about 100 years old because they figure it's about 10 years between this point to the end of the book. So he's around 100 at the end of the conquest and the beginning of the distribution of the land. So somewhere between 85 and 100, probably closer to 100 than anything else. So he's old, right? God reminds him he's old. I don't know if Joshua didn't know he was old, but he knows he's old now, right? God says you're old. So look at the rest of verse 1. He says, at the end of it, he says, there's very much of the land that remains to be possessed, a lot of the land that remains to be possessed. And he says, this is the land that remains, and he's about to list it. So what he's telling them, they've conquered the land, but they haven't conquered every single little city. They've conquered all the major cities. They've conquered really all the fortified cities, all the major cities. But there are still some small cities that they have not conquered yet. And so that's what he's about to list at this point. But if you'll remember, Joshua had a central campaign. He cut the country in half, conquering those central cities. Then he had a southern campaign, conquered the southern half. And he had a northern campaign. He conquered the northern half of the country. And so there are a few pockets left here and there. But not enough to really create much of a danger if they take care of it. And at this point, they can divide the land up, and if you have any more of the enemy in your land, your family can take care of it. If it's in Judah, Judah can take care of it, or whatever. So it's basically at that point. Now I'm going to read a few of these verses. Y'all don't laugh at me as I try to pronounce these names. Okay, so let's look. At the end of verse 2, he says, all the regions of the Philistines and those of the Gershurites, from Shihor, which is east of Egypt, even as far as the border of Ekron to the north, it is counted as Canaanite. The 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazites, the Ashdodites, the Ashkelonites, the Gittites, the Ekronite, and the Avites. Now see, if they had killed them, I wouldn't have to be saying that tonight, right? So verse 4 says, to the south, all the land of the Canaanite and Mirah, I'm not sure how to say that belongs to the Sidonians as far as Aphek to the border of the Amorite, and the land of the Gibeonite, and all of Lebanon toward the east, from Baal Gad below Mount Hermon, as far as Lebo Hamath, maybe. All the inhabitants of the hill country, from Lebanon as far as Mizrophath Maim. Got me on that one. All the Sidonians, I will drive them out from before the sons of Israel. Only allot it to Israel for an inheritance as I have commanded you. Now therefore appropriate this land for an inheritance to the 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh. So he's basically just kind of give the borders of the areas that still need to be conquered. If I understand it correctly, it has to do with a lot of the coast, the western coastal areas of the country, from the southern area of the coast where the Philistines live, up to the northern coastal areas, all the way up to Lebanon. So it's a lot of that coastal region. And if I'm not mistaken, when we get to the book of Judges, they're going to constantly be attacked by the Philistines who live on the coast. The Israelites live in the hill country, and so they didn't do a good job of finishing the enemy who lived on these coastal plains that he's talking about here. But we'll get into that when we get to the book of Judges. Now, here's something interesting. It can be confusing if you don't know what's going on, but look in verse 7. It says, now therefore, he wants them to appropriate this land for an inheritance, notice, to the what? 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh. Now, how many tribes are there? There's 12 tribes, 12 sons of Jacob, and 12 tribes of Israel. So we got 9 tribes here. And then if you'll look at verse 8, it says, with the other half tribe, and then the Reubenites and the Gadites, they've already received their inheritance. So there's the others that would make up the total of 12. So 2.5 tribes have already received their land. Remember that? They're on the east side of the Jordan River. They received their land before they went into the promised land because it's not part of the promised land. This was not the plan. This was not what they were supposed to do, but they saw the land. It looked good to them. They said, Moses, we want this land. And Moses said, okay, if that's what you think you want, I'll let you do it, but you got to help us conquer Canaan. And then when we're through, you can go back. And so that's the tribe of Gad, the tribe of Dan, and a half tribe of Manasseh. So verse 7, he says, you need to give the land to the other 9.5 tribes, is basically what he's saying at that point. Now, I know the map's probably hard to see, but you should have a map just like it in your Bible. But those 2.5 tribes I just talked about, if my little clicker works here, are these 3 tribes right here. Up here is the half tribe of Manasseh, and then you have the tribe of Gad and the tribe of Reuben, all on the east side of the Jordan River, which is running right through there. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Okay, let's see, where are we? Verse 8, verse 9. It says, so verse 8, it says, with the other half tribe, the Reubenites, the Gadites, received their inheritance, which Moses gave to them beyond the Jordan to the east, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave to them. And we just talked about that. And now he gives the borders, I guess you could say, from Aroer, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, with the city which is in the middle of the valley, and all the plain of Medeba as far as Dibon, and all the cities of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon as far as the border of the sons of Ammon. And he continues, I'm not going to read all those. He's going to go through that story again of how they conquered the kings that we've read about several times. But if you would, just go on down to verse 14. It says, only the tribe of Levi he did not give an inheritance. The offerings by fire to the Lord, the God of Israel, are their inheritance as he spoke to him. So everybody gets an inheritance. The land is their inheritance. But the tribe of Levi. Okay, so this gets confusing if you think about it. How many tribes are there? There's 12. But Joseph doesn't count. Because you notice there's not a tribe of Joseph on a map anywhere. But Joseph had 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. They're on there, okay? And you take Levi out, because that would be 13. But you take Levi out, they don't get land, so now you're back to 12. Because sometimes you'll come across the list of the 12 tribes of Israel, and there's variations. Sometimes Jacob is listed, sometimes he's not. Sometimes his 2 sons are listed. So you have these different variations, and that's why. Because Jacob blessed Joseph's 2 sons. Basically, he gave his 2 sons his portion of the blessing. Actually, a little more than that, and I'll talk about it in a moment. But the point I want to make here in verse 14, it says, only the tribe of Levi did not get an inheritance. So if you look on the map, you'll never find a portion of land for the tribe of Levi. And the reason why is they're the priestly tribe. Remember that? So they don't get a portion of the land. They're to be taken care of by all the other Israelites. They are to, they get a portion of the sacrifice. So when you come to make your sacrifices, your sin offering, or whatever the offering is, the priests get a portion of that offering, and so they are supported by the population of the people. Now they will receive cities, Levitical cities, within those land, or within the land of Israel. In fact, there are 48. There's going to be 48. We'll read about it in the next couple of chapters. There's 48 Levitical cities that are spread out throughout the land, and they're pretty evenly distributed by population. And I like the idea, and the reason why I think it's a good idea. Of course, God knows what He's doing. Think about it. If God had given the tribe of Levi their own plot of land, just picture up here another plot of land with a color on it with Levi in it. All of the priestly tribe would have been together. So that means everybody who knew the law, could teach the law, knew anything about the law, would all be together in one spot. They would all be congregated together. This way they're distributed evenly all throughout the country in 48 different cities, and they can go and do their duty at the tabernacle. Later they'll do their duty at the temple. Then they go back to their homes. And they're like missionaries. They're like preachers. They can teach the law. They can preach. They can teach others about God. And so that way, people aren't lost, living out in Israel. They can constantly teach them. And notice in verse 14, it says, God, the God of Israel, is their inheritance. So they got the God of the land. The other tribes got the land of the God, which I think they got the better end of the deal, because they got to teach people about God. They got to do the priestly duties and that sort of thing. And notice, if you'll jump down to verse 33, we're told this basically again: but the tribe of Levi, Moses did not give it inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance, as He has promised them. So they don't get a piece of land. So verse 15, it says, so Moses gave an inheritance to the tribe of the sons of Reuben according to their families. Their territory was from Aor, which is on the edge of the valley of the Arnon, with a city which is the middle of the valley. Okay, so from 16 through 23, we have his borders. I'm not going to read all that. Anybody want to volunteer to read all that out loud? I'm not going to read all that. Okay, so from 16 to 23, you have Reuben's borders. Beginning in verse 24, it says, Moses also gave an inheritance to the tribe of Gad, to the sons of Gad according to their families. And verse 25 says, their territory was, and then you read down to verse 28, and you have their borders. And then in verse 29, Moses also gave an inheritance to the half-tribe of Manasseh, and it was for the half-tribe of the sons of Manasseh according to their families. Their territory was, and then you read down through verse 31, and you have the borders of their territory. So that's the tribe of Reuben and their territory, the tribe of Gad, their territory, and the half-tribe of Manasseh and their territory. Again, we're talking about these three tribes on the east side of the Jordan River. Now, he started out, if you'll look, he started out in verse 16, talking, 15, talking about Reuben. If you'll remember, Reuben was the firstborn son of Jacob. Jacob had how many sons? 12 sons. They become the 12 tribes of Israel. Reuben's the oldest. He's the firstborn son. And all of you are familiar with the law in that society, in that culture, about the firstborn son. The firstborn son receives how much of the inheritance? A double portion of the inheritance, right? So if he's got 12 sons, the first son receives double what everybody else will receive. That's the right of the firstborn son. Reuben doesn't get a double portion of the inheritance. And the reason why is, if you'll remember back when Jacob was lying on his deathbed, he called all 12 of his sons to him, and he blessed them, and he prophesied over them about their future. And here's what he said about his son Reuben. Let me find it. I put it in my notes here. In Genesis 49, he said, it says, then Jacob summoned his sons and said, assemble yourselves that I may tell you what will befall you in the days to come. Gather together here, O sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father. He says, Reuben, you're my firstborn. And he goes on and describing like this. He says, you're uncontrolled as water. You shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed and you defiled it. And he went up to my couch. And what he's referring to is back in Genesis 35, it says this: it came about while Israel, that's Jacob. Remember, God changed his name to Israel, so it's kind of used back and forth. It says, it came about while Israel was dwelling in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. So what scholars believe that Reuben was probably doing, he wasn't just going after sexual gratification. He was trying to usurp his father's authority and basically take over the family by doing that. That was the same thing with Absalom and David. You remember Absalom did the same thing, and that was the whole point of sleeping with some of the concubines of his father, was to say, hey, listen, I'm taking your place. I'm the king. I'm the one in charge. And so they feel like that's what Reuben was trying to do at this point. And so because he did that, he doesn't get a double portion of the land. Who gets the double portion? Joseph. Okay, because he says, Joseph, you have two sons. This son's getting a portion and this son's getting a portion, so he gets a double portion. And what's interesting is Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, get the most fertile, best parts of Israel. Now, not necessarily this side over here. Remember, they chose land before they were supposed to. But over here, you have Manasseh and you have Ephraim, and that right there is some of the most fertile land in all of Israel. They got the best land in Israel because they got basically the firstborn's blessing from Jacob. Now, this is still good, fertile land up here in the northern part of what would be modern-day Jordan, I guess you could say. It's not desert. It's real fertile land up there. It's still fertile when you get down here, but you get down here to Reuben. Remember, Reuben's the firstborn who laid with his father's concubine. You know what all this land is down here? Desert. This is desert. It's just right on the Dead Sea, desert. Not a whole lot there. Interesting. So that was his inheritance. All right. So let's continue reading. We're in chapter 14. Hey, we just covered chapter 13. That was quick, wasn't it? Okay, chapter 14. You'll be familiar with this chapter. Verse 1, it says, now these are the territories which the sons of Israel inherited in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun, that was his father's name, right? Nun. And the heads of the households of the tribes of the sons of Israel appropriated to them for an inheritance by lot, notice, by lot of their inheritance, as the Lord commanded through Moses, for the 9 tribes and the half tribe. So the priest, through God's sovereignty and by, I guess, casting lots, the land was appropriated to the 9.5 tribes that were left. Now, the how big the land is was according to the population, but where the land was according to God, okay? Because you notice how big Judah's land is? They had the largest population, so they have the largest portion of land. But it was up to God who got what piece, where it was located, but by population as far as how big it was. So, verse 3, it says, for Moses had given the inheritance of the 2 tribes and the half tribe beyond the Jordan, right? We just talked about that. But he did not give an inheritance to the Levites among them. We talked about that. For the sons of Joseph were 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. And they did not give a portion to the Levites in the land except cities to live in. And those are the 48 cities I was telling you about, with their pasture lands for their livestock and for their property. Thus the sons of Israel did just as the Lord had commanded Moses, and they divided the land. Now verse 6. Then the sons of Judah drew near, because it's their turn to find out where their land is going to be. The sons of Judah drew near. Joshua drew near to Joshua in Gilgal. That's where this was taking place. And Caleb, okay, so now we know somebody, right? We've all heard of Caleb. We know Caleb's story. Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, funny name, Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know the word which the Lord spoke to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea. So let's stop there for a second. Let's talk about Caleb. Everybody's familiar with Caleb. If you've been in church for very long, if you grew up in church, you should know who Caleb is. So his dad's name is Jephunneh. That doesn't mean a whole lot to us, but the Kenizzite is what's interesting. And I'll be honest with you, up until today, I didn't know this. I just always thought the Kenizzite was a father or grandfather or great-grandfather who was still a descendant of Abraham. Well, the Kenizzites are not Jewish. He's a Gentile. Did y'all know he was a Gentile? I didn't know he was a Gentile either. Kenizzites, scholars are split. Most scholars believe that the Kenizzites were from an area called Arabia, which we'd call it Saudi Arabia today. And most likely during the Exodus, after they crossed the Red Sea, some of these Kenizzites joined with Israel, becoming believers in God, becoming a part of that covenant with God. And so they just joined on with Israel and just basically became a part of Israel through faith. And that's what we have with Caleb. That's what we have with his father, Jephunneh. The other theory is that they still came from that area, but they were already in Canaan. In fact, you can go back to Genesis when Abraham goes through, they're mentioned and they're already there. So they may have joined up when they got closer to Canaan. But anyway, the point is, Caleb's not Jewish. Caleb's a Gentile. He was a Gentile who became a believer in God, who became a part of the nation. I guess he was probably circumcised. But what's interesting is if you, and by the way, his name means bold. In Hebrew, it means dog. That's why we named my son Caleb, because it means dog. So I don't know if he knows that or not. But look at verse 7. It says, I was 40. He's speaking. He says, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, by the way, the nation, notice in verse 6, it's the tribe of Judah, the largest tribe of Israel that's the leaders have come up to Joshua to find out what their tribal inheritance is going to be. And who's the spokesman? A Gentile. He's made that much of an impression on everybody, I suppose. He's that faithful of a guy. I was 40 years old in verse 7 when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought word back to him as it was in my heart. He was one of the original 12 spies. So again, you have to think, okay, he joined up with Israel at some point during the Exodus and made a good enough impression on Moses that Moses sent him in as a spy, knowing he would be a faithful spy. He was one of only 2 faithful spies who came back trusting that God would give them the land. Verse 8 tells us this. Nevertheless, my brethren who went up with me made the heart of the people melt with fear, but I followed the Lord my God. How? Wholeheartedly, fully. I think that's why he's in the position he's in, because he didn't follow the Lord half-heartedly. He didn't follow the Lord mostly. He followed the Lord fully, wholeheartedly. So he was a man of great faith. Verse 9, so Moses swore, on that day, saying, surely the land on which your foot has trodden will be an inheritance to you and to your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God fully. So each of those 12 spies were given a certain area to go spy out. And so basically Moses said, that area you spied in, where your foot touched that'll be your land when you get there. So verse 10, now behold, the Lord has let me live just as he spoke these 45 years. It's 45 years later. He was 40 then. How old is he? He's 85 now. He's let me live these 45 years from the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses when Israel walked in the wilderness. And now behold, I'm 85 years old today. It's his birthday. How about that? It's his birthday. And he's going to get his inheritance. So he's 85 years old, and he was 40 when it all began. Now verse 11, he says, and this is kind of funny. He says, I'm still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now for war and for going out and coming in. So here's an 85-year-old man who thinks he's as strong as he was when he was 40. Now, men are hard-headed, and granted, most of them probably think they're still as strong as they were when they're young. I know I'm not. But, here's an 85-year-old man who says, hey, I'm just as strong as I was when I was 40. Let's go. Put me in the fight. Everybody probably looked at him like he was crazy. I think he's telling the truth. I don't think he's exaggerating. I don't think it's even a miracle from God. I think this has to do with his attitude more than anything else. Because he's going to fight his battle the same way he was going to fight it when he was 40 years old. The Lord was going to fight it for him. And that was his attitude. That was his attitude 45 years ago when he was ready to take the land in. God was going to do it. And his attitude now, 45 years later, is exactly the same. God's going to do it now. So I'm just as strong now as I was then because God's the one who's going to take the battle, right? So I think he's telling the truth in a spiritual way. He's just as strong as he was 45 years before. I believed in God then. I still believe in God now. He was going to give us the land then. He's going to give us now. Nothing's changed. God's going to conquer the land. Verse 12. Now then, give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. So that's the area he spied. For you heard on that day that Anakim were there with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken. Remember, Anakim were the giants of the land. Now, I find this to be interesting. Here's this 85-year-old man. He could have said, hey, Moses, I'm 85. Why don't you give me just a little spot on the beach out by the Mediterranean? And, my children can build me a little hut, and I can just hang out. I've only got a few years left, and I can I've earned it. I can take it easy. No, he says, I want that mountain where those giants are, and I'm going to go take them. I mean, that says a lot about the guy. He wasn't ready to quit. He was ready to do what the Lord wanted him to do 45 years before, but everybody else didn't want to do. And so he was kind of stuck in that position. Verse 13, so Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. And just so you know, because I'm a visual guy, let's see if I can see it. Jerusalem is there, if you can see my little green laser. Hebron is there. I think that's about 18 miles or 28 miles. I can't remember. It had an 8 in it, and it wasn't far. I think it was 18, about 18 miles from Hebron. And it's on a mountain, so it's a fortified city. And from the city, you can see the coast, and you can also see the Dead Sea. But that's the land that he inherited, the specific city he inherited, and he lived in. So Joshua, verse 13, blessed him, gave him Hebron, gave to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. Therefore, Hebron became an inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, until this day, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, fully. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba, for Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, the giants, and then the land had rest from war. We finished that. But let me say a couple things about Caleb. I think it's interesting that Caleb received his reward. Joshua kept the promise that was 45 years old. Would you keep a promise after 45 years? I hope you would. Joshua kept a promise. After 45 years, he kept this. He kept this promise. It was Moses' promise, yes, and Joshua kept that. So I was thinking, there's a lot we can learn from Caleb, but one of the things I was thinking about is he just didn't quit. I mean, there's nothing wrong with retiring. There's nothing wrong with slowing down, but I think as long as we're here, we can be doing something. And I was thinking about how important our seniors are in our church, and how important, Caleb was to the nation of Israel. I was thinking about when I first came to Rose Hill, we were mostly seniors at the church, and we were having a hard time getting young people in the church. And I remember every time somebody young would come, they'd leave, and if I could find out why they left, it was usually because there was nobody there our age, right? And I see some of these churches that are all young people with no middle-aged or senior adults, and I have to think, man, they can't be a healthy church, right? Because where does the wisdom? Do they have the wisdom the older people have? And so you kind of have that on both spectrums. An older church has issues because you have to worry about the future. A younger church doesn't have the wisdom of the older. And I've come to the conclusion you have to have all. You have to have young, you have to have middle-aged, you have to have older. And if you don't have one of those groups, you're not a healthy church. And so I know the seniors probably feel like sometimes they may not be as important as they used to be, but we need your wisdom, we need your service, we need your faithfulness. We still need you. Okay, so don't ever think you're not needed or not important at our church. And if you're still able and willing, pass your wisdom down to people that you see that are younger and faithful in this church, because that's how that's supposed to work. So pass that wisdom down to younger people. So I know I finished early. Some of you are probably glad I finished early, but I don't know how much more my voice can take. So let's look at our prayer sheet. Yes, ma'am. Their land, because half the tribe decided they wanted to live on the east side of the Jordan. That was it. And the other half of the tribe decided they wanted to go into the promised land. So that was the only reason there was a split tribe, was just them possessing what part of the land. I got a text right before we started from Carolyn. She said that her and BB are not feeling well. Please pray for them. And she said, please pray for their family. Of course, her son Scott found out he had cancer, but he's in a lot of a lot of pain, and he'll begin radiation on Friday. Go to MD Anderson on September the 4th. I think he's going to begin his radiation before he goes, but he's going to begin his radiation and then go to MD Anderson. And she also gave an update on Nancy Brooks, who broke her hip, said that she's progressing slowly, but should leave rehab by September the 2nd. And she asked for prayers from our church family. So keep BB and Carolyn in prayer, and their son Scott and Nancy Brooks. Let me grab a pencil. Are there any other updates? Yes, sir. Yeah, Latham. So keep her in prayer. So it's a blood clot they think it is? Okay. Any others?